Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a whole bunch of sources all about this idea of ego as the enemy.
Yeah, and we hear that phrase tossed around a lot, but I think we'll see it's not just about like avoiding arrogance, right? It goes way deeper than that.
Absolutely. We're really going to try to unpack how this ego thing can trip us up at every level,
Hmm.
whether we're just starting out, hitting some major success, or even dealing with failure.
Exactly. And our main guide for this is going to be Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy. But we've also got some fascinating stories and historical examples to bring these ideas to life.
All right, so are you ready to unpack all this?
I'm ready. Let's dive in.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about ego is that it can be really sneaky. It often hides behind things like ambition or even passion.
Oh, absolutely. And that can make it super hard to even recognize sometimes.
Right. It's like that voice in your head that's always saying, look at me, look at me.
Uh huh.
When what we really need to be doing is just focusing on the work, you know?
Exactly. And a perfect example of this is the story of Upton Sinclair. Remember him? He was a writer, very famous in his time.
Vaguely refresh my memory.
Well, he wrote this whole book basically outlining all the amazing things he was going to do as governor of California. Problem was, he wrote the whole thing in the past tense.
Oh, ouch. As if he'd already done it all before he even won the election.
Exactly. Talk about letting your ego get way ahead of reality, right?
Yeah, major faceplant waiting to happen.
And it did,
Yeah.
sadly. But his story is a great lesson for all of us, especially when we're first starting out in our careers.
It's so tempting to get caught up in that self-promotion, trying to make a big splash right away.
It is. We want to prove ourselves, which is natural, but sometimes the best approach is just to put your head down and do the work, let the results speak for themselves.
Right, focus on the doing, not the being seen doing it.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with someone like John Boyd. Have you ever heard of him?
I'm not sure. Who was he?
He was a brilliant military strategist, but he never sought the spotlight. He chose to work behind the scenes, influencing generations of military leaders and shaping the way wars are fought.
Wow, and most people have probably never even heard his name.
Exactly, and that's kind of the point. He wasn't concerned with fame or recognition. He was all about the work, about making a real difference.
That's a powerful example. It really flips the script on what we usually think of as success, right?
It does, and it's a good reminder that sometimes the most effective way to make an impact is by working quietly and diligently without needing all the fanfare.
So it's like that saying, let your actions speak louder than your words.
Absolutely, and this brings us to another tricky aspect of ego, this whole idea of the passion trap.
Ooh, yeah, we're constantly being told to follow our passion these days. But it's not always that simple, is it?
It's not. Passion's great, don't get me wrong, but it can actually lead us astray if we're not careful.
Right. It's like that saying, all sizzle, no steak. We've got a perfect example of this. Robert Falcon Scott's Antarctic expedition.
Oh, right. Tragic story.
Driven by passion, absolutely.
Mhm.
But his lack of preparation and pragmatism, really led to tragedy.
Yeah, his story's a good reminder that passion needs to be balanced with things like discipline, planning, and a healthy dose of realism.
So it's not just about feeling it, it's about channeling that energy effectively.
Exactly. Now contrast that with someone like Kirk Hammett when he joined Metallica.
Okay, I can see where you're going with this.
Right. Already incredibly talented, but he still went and sought out rigorous instruction to keep pushing himself, keep getting better.
From Joe Satriani, no less, a guitar legend, it shows that even when you're at a high level, there's always room to grow and learn.
That willingness to stay a student is crucial. And sometimes the best way to learn and advance is actually by shifting our focus outward a bit.
What do you mean?
Well, this is what Holiday calls the canvas strategy. It's this idea of clearing the path for others to shine, focusing on making others successful. And in doing so, you learn and grow too.
I love that. Because you'd think that focusing on yourself would be the fastest way to get ahead, but maybe that's ego talking.
Maybe it is. Think about Benjamin Franklin ghostwriting for his brother's newspaper early in his career. He honed his skills and built his reputation, all while working behind the scenes.
Right. And Bill Belichick, the legendary football coach,
Yeah.
taking an unpaid job just to learn from the best.
Exactly. These are great examples of how serving others, adding value, it can actually open up these amazing opportunities down the road.
It's like that saying, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Powerful stuff.
It is. And when we talk about overcoming ego, there's perhaps no better example than Jackie Robinson.
Absolutely. Talk about facing adversity with incredible grace and strength.
Breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, enduring unimaginable racism and abuse, but he made this pact with himself to resist reacting with anger or violence.
And it took incredible willpower. I can't even imagine.
Most of us would struggle with a fraction of what he faced.
Right. Absolutely. And the thing is, his restraint, it wasn't weakness. It was a strategic choice. It allowed him to achieve this monumental goal and pave the way for so many others.
It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Think about the battles you're facing right now in your own life. Are there any that you might be better off not engaging in?
That's a good question to ask ourselves for sure. Sometimes not letting our egos take over is the toughest battle of all.
It really is. And this brings us to another battleground, which is often inside our own minds.
Oh, you mean that constant chatter we all have going on in our heads? The inner critic, the doubts and the worries?
Exactly. It can be so loud
It's
sometimes.
exhausting.
Anne Lamott calls this station KFKD, this loop of self-aggrandizement and self-loathing that just plays on repeat in our heads.
Station KFKD. I like that.
It's like this inner radio station that's constantly broadcasting either praise or criticism, and it never seems to shut off, right?
And the problem is, it can really distort the way we see the world.
Exactly. It can lead us to make bad decisions, miss out on opportunities. We can basically sabotage ourselves without even realizing it.
It's almost like we're trapped in this echo chamber of our own thoughts.
Exactly. Learning to quiet that inner critic, that's key. That's essential for making clear, rational decisions.
Easier said than done, though, right?
It takes practice, for sure, but it's so worth it. And this brings us back to the importance of work, real, consistent, dedicated effort.
Because ideas are great, but without execution, they're just that, ideas.
Right, and this is where ego can be a real obstacle because it can make us so focused on the idea of ourselves as brilliant and talented that we never actually do the work to become those things.
Like we're so busy trying to look like a genius that we forget to actually be one, right?
Exactly. Think of Edgar Degas, the brilliant impressionist painter. He had all these ideas for poems, but he just couldn't seem to get them down on paper, He lacked the discipline to turn them into words.
So even someone as talented as Degas struggled with this.
He did, and his friend the poet, Stephen Mallarmé, he put it perfectly. He said, "You can't make poems with ideas, you make them with words. It's about the doing, not just the dreaming."
That's a good one. It's a reminder that mastery requires us to show up every day and put in the work, even when it's not glamorous, even when it's hard.
Couldn't agree more. And that's something we'll keep exploring as we go deeper into this topic of ego.
Okay, so we've seen how ego can trip us up when we're just starting out. But what happens when we actually start to find success? Does ego become less of a problem, or does it become even more dangerous?
Well, that's a great question, and it's one we'll tackle next time, because as we'll see, success can present its own unique set of challenges when it comes to keeping our egos in check. It's funny how success can be almost as tricky to navigate as failure when it comes to ego.
Yeah, it really is. You'd think hitting your goals would make you feel more confident,
Hmm.
more secure.
You would, but it can often have the opposite effect, right? Success can inflate our egos to the point where we start thinking we're invincible, that the rules don't apply to us anymore.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like we're suddenly on this pedestal and we can do no wrong.
Exactly. And a classic example of this is someone like Howard Hughes, right? He went from this brilliant innovator, a daring aviator, to this reclusive, paranoid billionaire, almost a caricature of himself.
Yeah, sad story for sure. It really shows how success without that balance of humility, discipline, it can all come crashing down.
It's a reminder that maintaining success often requires even more self-awareness and resilience than achieving it in the first place.
Because it's easy to become complacent. Right?
Yeah.
You hit a certain level and you think, okay, I've made it. I can relax now.
It's tempting, but that's when things start to slip. We lose that hunger, that drive that got us there in the first place.
So how do we stay grounded? How do we keep learning and growing even when we're at the top of our game?
Well, one key is cultivating what's called the beginner's mind. That sense of curiosity and openness, always being willing to learn something new.
I love that idea. It's like approaching everything with fresh eyes, no matter how much you already know.
Exactly. And it's interesting. We often think of Genghis Khan as this ruthless conqueror, but he was also a relentless learner.
Really? I didn't know that about him.
He was constantly adapting his strategies, incorporating new ideas and technologies from the cultures he encountered. He never assumed he knew it all.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. It's like he understood that to stay ahead, you have to keep evolving.
He did. And it's a powerful lesson for all of us, right? No matter how successful we become, there's always more to learn, always room for improvement.
Absolutely. It's like we're running a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
You have to keep pushing yourself, keep learning, keep growing if you want to stay ahead.
Exactly. And another key to managing ego in the face of success is maintaining a sense of sobriety.
Sobriety. You mean like not drinking?
Well, that's not a bad idea, but I'm talking about keeping a clear head, a sense of perspective even when you're surrounded by the trappings of success.
So it's about not letting it go to your head, basically.
Exactly. And someone who exemplifies this really well is Angela Merkel. In a world of ego-driven politicians, she was known for her calm, rational, results-oriented approach.
Yeah, she was never flashy or attention-grabbing, but she got things done. It's like she was quietly working in the background while everyone else was clamoring for the spotlight.
That's a great way to put it. And that quiet, focused approach, it served her incredibly well. It allowed her to stay grounded, make good decisions, even under immense pressure.
It's almost like all that grandstanding and self-promotion, it's just a way to compensate for a lack of real confidence, isn't it?
I think it often is. When we're truly secure in ourselves and our abilities, we don't need to constantly seek that external validation.
Right, we don't need all the bells and whistles.
Exactly. So we've talked about how ego can trip us up when we're striving for success and even when we achieve it. But what about when we inevitably face setbacks, when things don't go our way?
That's the real test, isn't it? How we handle failure, how we pick ourselves up and keep going.
It is. Because failure is a part of life, we all experience it. The question is, how do we respond to it? Do we let our egos get the best of us? Or do we see it as an opportunity to learn and grow?
Yeah, I think we both know that wallowing in self-pity and blaming others isn't going to be very helpful.
Not at all. It just keeps us stuck in that negative cycle. It's important to remember that failure, while it's painful, can be an incredible teacher.
As long as we're willing to listen to those lessons, right?
Exactly. And we have to be willing to let go of that ego's need to be right, to always be perfect.
It's tough, but it's so freeing when you can finally do that.
It is. Do you have any examples of people who turned failure into opportunity?
Oh, for sure. Think about Katharine Graham. She went from being a sheltered housewife to the CEO of the Washington Post company, and it wasn't easy.
Wow, that's a huge leap.
It was. She had no experience, faced a ton of sexism and resistance, but she was determined to succeed. She embraced the challenge, learned everything she could, and eventually became one of the most respected figures in media.
That's an inspiring story. It shows that we can overcome incredible obstacles when we set our minds to it and don't let our egos get in the way.
It's about choosing to see failure as a stepping stone, not a roadblock. Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. Think of Malcolm X's experience in prison.
Oh, right. He transformed himself during that time, didn't he?
He did. He used his time to educate himself, read voraciously, and he emerged as this powerful voice for change.
It's incredible to think that such a difficult experience could lead to such positive transformation.
It's a powerful reminder that we always have a choice, even in the midst of adversity. We can choose to let it defeat us, or we can choose to use it as fuel for growth.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to another important aspect of managing ego, which is learning to let go.
Let go. Let go of what?
Of the need for recognition, the need to control outcomes, the need to be right all the time. These are all things that our egos cling to, but letting go of them can be incredibly liberating.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It's like trying to hold on to sand. The tighter you grip it, the more it slips away.
That's a great analogy, and it's so true. The more we try to control everything, the more frustrated and anxious we become. We have a tragic example of this in the story of General Belisarius. He was this brilliant military leader in the Roman Empire.
I don't think I've heard of him.
Well, he was incredibly successful on the battlefield, but he was betrayed and ultimately punished by the emperor despite all his victories. He clung to his ego, to the need for recognition and justice, and it led to bitterness and resentment, a sad end to an otherwise remarkable life.
It's heartbreaking, but it also makes you think, right, about how clinging to those external validations can ultimately lead to our own downfall.
It's a powerful lesson in the importance of finding satisfaction in the work itself, in the journey, rather than clinging to some outcome or reward.
So it's about detaching from the ego's need for external validation and finding that inner peace.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important point, which is maintaining perspective, even when we're winning.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, think about the New England Patriots, one of the most successful football franchises of all time. They drafted Tom Brady, who's arguably the greatest quarterback ever, but they were still critical of their scouting reports. They were still looking for ways to improve.
Wow, that's impressive. They were already winning championships, but they weren't content to just rest on their laurels.
Exactly. They had this culture of continuous improvement, this willingness to learn and grow even when they were at the top.
So it's about celebrating your wins without letting them go to your head, without becoming complacent.
Exactly, because the moment we start believing our own hype, that's when we stop learning. That's when we stop growing.
It's like we've reached the summit of a mountain, but there are always higher peaks to climb, you know, new challenges to conquer.
And that's the beauty of it. There's always something more to learn, something more to achieve, as long as we're willing to stay humble and keep pushing ourselves.
So we've explored the dangers of ego at every stage,
Hmm.
from striving for success to achieving it, even to dealing with failure. But we've also seen how embracing humility, discipline, and a willingness to learn, those are the keys to real, lasting success.
Absolutely, and that's what this whole deep dive is about, right? Recognizing the power of ego, how it can work for us or against us, and ultimately how to keep it in check.
Because it really is a choice, isn't it? We can choose to let our egos run the show, or we can choose to be in control.
Exactly. And we have one last story to share that really highlights how ego and that need for control can backfire. It's the story of Orson Welles and the backlash against his film, Citizen Kane.
Oh, right. William Randolph Hearst. He was convinced the film was about him, and he was furious, wasn't he?
He was. He used his entire media empire to try to suppress the film, to discredit Wells. It was a classic case of ego gone wild, trying to control the narrative, silence any criticism.
It's amazing how powerful those defense mechanisms can be, even when they're completely irrational.
Absolutely. And in this case, it totally backfired. Hearst's efforts just made the film even more famous and solidified his own reputation as this vindictive, controlling figure.
Wow, so what about Wells? How did he handle all this?
He had just kept his head down and focused on his art, on the work itself. He didn't get caught up in the drama, and ultimately, he emerged from the whole ordeal unscathed. Citizen Kane is now considered one of the greatest films ever made.
It's a great reminder that sometimes the best way to win is to not play the game at all. Just focus on what you can control and let the work speak for itself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about surrendering that need to control everything and everyone around you and just putting your energy into the things that truly matter.
So it's like that saying, what other people think of me is none of my business. You can't control how others perceive you, but you can control how you show up in the world.
Exactly. And I think this is a perfect point to step back and kind of distill everything we've learned into a concise, actionable list. Are you ready for the 10 key takeaways from our deep dive into ego as the enemy?
Okay, hit me with number one.
All right, number one is action trumps talk. Remember Upton Sinclair. All caught up in promoting himself, forgot to actually, do the work.
Yeah, all sizzle, no steak, as they say.
Exactly. Easy trap to fall into, especially these days when everyone's obsessed with building their brand and all that.
Oh, for sure. But ultimately, it's what you do that matters, not
Right.
just what you say you're going to do.
Exactly. Okay, number two. Passion isn't enough.
Ooh, that's a good one. We see this everywhere. Follow your passion, right?
Yeah, and passion's important, but it can actually lead us astray if we're not careful. Robert Falcon Scott, that Antarctic expedition, remember?
Oh, yeah. Driven by passion, but ultimately unprepared.
Exactly. Passion without planning, discipline, realism, it can be a recipe for disaster.
Like having a powerful engine but no steering wheel, you're going to crash and burn.
Exactly. All right, number three. Serve others to succeed. This is what Holiday calls the canvas strategy.
Oh, right. Like Benjamin Franklin ghostwriting
Oh.
or Bill Belichick taking that unpaid coaching job.
Exactly. They both achieved amazing things by focusing on adding value, making others successful.
And in doing so, they became successful themselves.
Precisely. Sometimes the best way to get ahead is to help others get there first.
Love it. Okay, number four.
Number four, restraint is strength.
Ah, yes, like Jackie Robinson's story. Incredible restraint in the face of such adversity.
Exactly. His self-control was actually a strategic advantage. It allowed him to achieve his goals and pave the way for others.
It's about knowing when to hold back, knowing when to fight.
Exactly. Think about your own life. Are there any battles you're fighting that maybe you shouldn't be?
Good question. Okay, what's number five?
Number five, quiet your mind, remember station, KFKD.
Oh, yeah, that constant inner chatter.
All that self-doubt, self-criticism, it can really hold us back.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Any tips for how to quiet that down?
Mindfulness practices can be really helpful. Meditation, paying attention to your breath, just becoming more aware of those thought patterns.
That's great advice. All right, what's next?
Number 6, work ethic is key. No matter how talented you are, mastery takes consistent, dedicated effort.
Right, no shortcuts. Even someone like Degas struggled with this, right?
He did, had all these ideas for poetry, but he just didn't put in the work.
So it's about showing up every day, even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. Number 7, sobriety sustains success.
Okay, remind me what we meant by sobriety again.
It's about keeping a clear head, a sense of perspective, even when you're surrounded by success. Angela Merkel's a great example of this.
Right, she was known for her calm, rational approach, even under pressure.
Exactly. Okay, number 8, never stop learning.
Ooh, I like this one. Always be a student.
Exactly. Cultivate that beginner's mind, that curiosity, that openness to new ideas. Even Genghis Khan, he was constantly learning and adapting.
Right, it's about staying humble, realizing you don't know it all.
Exactly. Okay, number 9,
Hit me.
embrace failure.
Yeah, we talked about Katharine Graham and how she turned her setbacks into opportunities,
It's about reframing failure as a part of the journey, a chance to learn and grow.
not letting it define you.
Exactly. All right, last one, number 10, let go of control.
Ah, this is a big one.
It is, remember General Belisarius? He clung to his ego, to the need for recognition, and it led to bitterness and resentment.
It's a reminder that we can't control everything.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to win is to surrender, to let go of that need to be in control.
Powerful stuff. Wow, this list is amazing. It really sums up everything we've talked about today.
It's a good roadmap for keeping ego in check, and ultimately for living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's one final thought for you to ponder. What if, instead of asking ourselves, how do I become successful, we asked ourselves, how do I become a better human being? Because in the end, isn't that what truly matters? Until next time, keep diving deep and keep your ego in check.